Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Stingy Simple Space Shooters tutorial series. In this final episode, we're going to be talking about game managers and singleton game objects and switching scenes, scene management, and all that kind of fun stuff. So we'll get started here by making a game manager. So this is going to be a script that we're going to create. We're going to call it a game manager. So what is a game manager? So this is a common thing that you might have in your games. What the game manager is there to do is manage the state of the game. So whether the player is pausing or playing, or whether the player has lost and we need to trigger a game over state, or the player has won and we need to trigger a, congratulations kind of state, or scene transition. That's all going to be handled in the game manager. So we'll get started creating that here. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of the guts of this just like normal. Our game manager is going to be a singleton. Now what does it mean to be a singleton? That just means that there's only ever going to be one game manager in the scene at any one time. So in order to do that, we're going to say public static game manager instance. And that's going to be how we're going to access our game manager from any other class. And then on the private void awake function, we want to check if the instance is equal to null. And if it is, then we set the instance to this particular object. And if not, we destroy the object. So that ensures that there can only be one game manager at any given time. Because that awake function is going to play. And if there's another game manager, we're going to delete it essentially. And otherwise, we're going to set that to the instance. So we'll see how to actually call that in a second. And now what we want to do is define what our various gameplay states are. For our little simple game here, we really just want to track if the player won the game or the player lost the game. And you lose by dying, and you win by beating the boss. So what happens when any of those states trigger? We want a timer. And so when one of those states go off, we're going to start the timer. So here we in our private void update, if the player 1 state is true, we're going to start the timer rolling. And after the timer elapses, we're going to transition into a new scene, a game over but you won scene. So we're going to create a scene that we don't have yet, but we're going to call it 1. And we're going to use the scene management, Unity engine.scene management.scene manager.load scene, and give it the name of the scene. And in our case, it's going to be 1. Then we're going to copy and paste all that code, and we're really going to do the exact same thing for when the player loses, except we're going to call the scene game over instead of 1. Okay, so now we need to think about how do we actually set those Boolean states. So we're just going to create 2 methods. So when the boss dies, we're going to say onBossDied, public void onBossDied, then player 1 equals true, and public void onPlayerDied and player lost equals to true. And so now we just need to invoke these when the appropriate actions in the game happen. So what we're going to do is come into our spaceship class, and we're going to change our die function because we want to be able to override that. So instead of making it private void die, we're going to say protected override void die. And that allows us to go into both our player and our boss, but we'll start with the player and override that function. So we're going to say protected override void die in our player class. We're still going to call the base .die because that handles all the explosion effects and all the stuff that we still want to happen when the player dies. But on top of that, we want to talk to our game manager singleton. So we're going to do game manager.instance.onPlayerDied. And so that's how we're going to invoke that function. Similarly, we're going to go into the big boss and do the exact same thing. Public override void die, base.die because we still want the base to go off. And then we want to invoke our onBossDied function. That's all we need to do code-wise. So back in the Unity editor, we need to apply this game manager script. So we're going to create a new game object. We're going to call it game manager, and we're going to add our game manager component to that game object. So now we need to do a couple other things. We need to create 2 new scenes. So we need a scene for, as you recall, for when you've won and that scene's going to be called 1, and we need a game over scene. So we're going to start with the game over scene. And to do that, we're going to go up to the top, and we're going to go to File, New Scene, and we're just going to do the basic built-in. And right away, we can go ahead and save that in the same scenes folder. And we just want to make sure we name that game over, which is what we called it in the script. Now, all we're looking to do in this scene is create a text box UI. So we're going to go to Game Object, UI, and Text. And we're just going to say, hey, you lost, is what we're going to say in the text. And then I'm just going to adjust the parameters to make the text a little bigger and sort of center it out. I'm also going to say press R to restart, and we'll create a script to make that actually work. So we're going to say go ahead, create a script, and we're going to call it Game Over Manager, and we're going to just attach it to our camera. And when we edit the script, all we want to do in here is in the update function, we're going to check for the key press of R, and if that happens, we're going to load back into our gameplay scene. So for the U1 scene, we're just going to copy the game over scene, and we're just going to change the text from you lost to U1, essentially. And otherwise, the scene's going to be the exact same. But again, we want to make sure we've added that to our build settings so that you can actually use the scene manager to switch to that scene. And that's everything. Now the game is fully playable. There's a game over, winning and a game over losing state, and they should both transition into those states as we want them to. And so this is really everything in a obviously very bare bones game package. But now I just want to really quickly review all the things we've learned over the course of these tutorials. So in our first tutorial, we learned about the different programs we're going to use while creating games. In our second tutorial, we learned where we can grab different background photos and how to create skyboxes from those panoramic photos, and then also how to manipulate material properties from a script to create a scrolling background effect. In the tutorial after that, we got into some basic 3D modeling in Blender, and we saw how to both create those models and import them into Unity for our use, and then how to normalize those models within Unity so that they're facing the correct directions. After that, we looked at some basic player input, so moving around, and in that tutorial we created our first base class. So we got into some object-oriented principles there, so we looked at base classes and overriding of those classes. Later on, we brought in interfaces and how to use those for shooting. Later on, we looked at object pooling to take care of bullets. Then we got into some basic bad guy AI, so we had them move along a sine wave function. Then we figured out how to spawn those bad guys in waves and create an entire level that goes on for a couple minutes where different waves spawn in. And then we created a different type of bad guy, a boss for the game, who can shoot bullets, which is different than how the other bad guys work, and also move in a different kind of pattern. And then finally, we've looked at scene management and game managers and singletons in this last tutorial. So we've really touched on a lot of different areas of programming and using Unity, doing different game development things that if you get into the hobby, you're going to be doing this kind of stuff all the time. And yeah, I hope you've learned something. It doesn't always have to make sense. I never intended, some of the programming here might have gotten a little bit complicated. And I only touched on it briefly, but you're at least exposed to the ideas here, and eventually they will make sense to you, even if they don't maybe at this particular moment. So let's talk about how you can extend this base game that we have. So here's a couple ways. In the game manager, you could add scoring. So you could override the die function on all the little baddies as well, and have them call a function in the game manager to increment the score by a certain amount. You could have the game manager track the lives of the player, so you could give the player 1, 2, or 3 lives before they get to game over. You can add different types of bad guys. Right now, as I said before, we have the bad guy who follows a sine wave pattern, but you can have all different kinds of patterns. We could have a bad guy that tracks the player and tries to crash into him. You can have one follow all different types of geometric functions or trigonometric functions to have them move around the screen in different patterns. And you can implement those very similarly to how we implemented our sine wave baddie. You can also have the bad guys themselves shoot. You can have some like elite units that also shoot bullets. At the end of the day, we want the player dodging a bunch of different things along with having a bunch of different stuff to shoot at. You could also have multiple levels. So we have one level defined, that's 2 minutes, that you encounter a boss at the end of. But instead of going into a U1 scene, we could have it transition into the next level, where it all kind of starts over again, and you have a new set of patterns and bad guys for the player to fight. So there's just all kinds of places you can take this game if you want to. You might want to think about also things that you kind of expect from games when you play them. So things like options menus, a starting splash screen where you can click on new game, or continue if your game has saves. Like I said before, an options menu where you can do things like remap the control scheme, change the volume controls, video options like resolution and running in windowed mode and that kind of thing. I didn't get into any of that, but because I feel like maybe that was a little too technical for what we were trying to achieve in this tutorial series, but those are still things that you might want to add to your game if you choose to pursue it further. Okay, so we'll wrap that up here. The point is there's lots of different things you can do with this if you want to use this as a base. I just want to mention again that all of the code that we've done for this tutorial series is in GitHub with a link to that in the description, so you can just go ahead and download the entire project that you've seen me create through the course of this tutorial and use that as a base for your own things. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. I had fun making it. If you have any questions, please reach out and I'll try to help you as best as I can. Leave a like if you feel so inclined. If not, that's cool too, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.